Hello everyone, I am Vanishri from GFGC Chennapatna. Today I am talking on the topic laffer curve. Laffer curve was developed by Arthur Laffer, who was being a supply side economist. Arthur Laffer shows the relationship between tax rate and the amount of tax revenue collected by the government. He explains the relationship between the tax rate and the total tax revenue with an optimal tax rate that can maximize the tax total tax revenue to the government. He explains the relationship as sometimes when the tax rates exceeds a particular point, instead of increasing a tax revenue, it start reducing the total tax revenue. Instead, if we cut down the tax rates, can increase the total tax revenue. So we'll see the Arthur Laffer's curve in a PPT, so which I'm just sharing with you people. See, this is what is the shape of a Laffer curve. In the free market, conservative insists that the revenue maximizing the income tax rate is more than 35 to 40%, then definitely it should increase the tax revenue. But when we look into the graphical representation, it shows that above the 60% of the tax rate what has been imposed will reduce the tax revenues. See this graphical representation. On the x-axis we are showing the tax rate, on the y-axis we are showing the tax revenues in the billions. So this curve explains that if the tax rate is in between 40 to 50%, it is an high yielding point, but after the 60% rise in the total tax rate, it starts diminishing. So then what's the Laffer other half of the Laffer curve? The main reason why tax revenues fall when the income tax rates are above the certain rate, so people will evade or avoid the taxes because people are suffocated. People will not have any interest. So it will discourage the tax activities itself. Like it may be working, it may be investing on something, it may be even savings. So people start avoiding the things or start discouraging the activities which encourage them to pay the taxes. So most importantly, people will be unwilling to work, start the business, low net wages or the profits, so will remain unemployed rather than pay huge tax rates. So all the taxes on the output, labor, income or the profits hereafter is being collectively as an income tax is being depressed. So the GDP rate itself will start reducing. So the revenue maximizing tax rate, which may indeed be as high as 65 to 70%, is an irrelevant as a reduction in GDP can be as much again as the tax raised. So, assuming labor elasticity at 0.4%, the impact of the different income tax rates on GDP is shown on the next slide. So, this is about the total tax and the total GDP. So the GDP will be reduced, at the GDP growth rate will be reduced. So this is what is an effect of laffer curve. So impact of income taxes on GDP, to talk about, the average marginal income tax rate is about 50%, and when it has been taking into account the income tax, national insurance, VAT, and corporation tax. The UK GDP is currently just over 1,400 billion. The previous slide, which shows that if we were to reduce the income tax to 0%, GDP would increase to around 1,900 billion. So that means what? When you reduce the tax rates, there is a vast scope for increasing your GDP or the total growth rate. So here I'm just sharing with you some of the major elements are the issues with regarding to a document, that is the contents with regarding to the history and the origin of Arthur Laffer. The history speaks about, he was been in actually, he takes this Arthur Laffer restructures this Ather-Laffer curve during one of the particular meetings. In a meeting, he eventually comes out with the Laffer curve. So, about the historical development of Laffer curve, then the empirical analysis of income tax, tax of goods and services. So, how it has been expressed in the United Kingdom, all these things, and how it encourages, disencourages the various activities, all these things. So I have been sharing with you this document through the um, through this video. So this is about the Laffer curves, origin, proceedings, everything. So I have one more PPT for you, the video for you. I'll just share with this, and this also explains about the Laffer curve.
The laffer curve analysis assumes that there is a relationship between the tax rate we apply, for example on income tax or VAT, and the total tax revenue collected, measured here on the y-axis. Here's a conceptual laffer curve. You don't necessarily need to draw tax rates of 0% and 100%. It's more realistic to think of tax rates within a positive range. So, for example, if we increase the tax rate from T1 to T2, starting at relatively low tax percentages, then we might expect to see an increase in the total tax revenue. And indeed that's shown on the curve. Equally, tax rate T3 is at the peak of the laffer curve. And this might be considered the optimal tax rate if, and this is a key point, if the objective is to maximise total tax revenue. Of course, the government might have introduced a tax for reasons other than the need to generate revenue to the exchequer. But if we move beyond T3, under certain circumstances, increasing the tax rate to T4, a relatively high tax rate, might actually cause a fall in total tax revenue, total tax collection. Of course, one of the implications of this is if we cut taxes from T4 to T3, then the total revenue from tax might actually go up. So why might tax revenues increase why might tax revenues fall if the tax rate increases? If we go from T3 to T4, why might the total tax revenues actually decline? Well, there's all kind of various explanations for this, one of which is that if you increase the tax rate, there's a greater incentive for people and businesses to avoid taxation. People have an incentive to employ a tax lawyer to make optimum use of their tax relief and tax allowances. Businesses may decide to provide all kinds of different ways to avoid.
So here, while he is explaining about the tax Laffer curve analysis, he says why might the total tax revenues fall if the tax rate increases? So, increased rate of tax avoidances, so greater incentives to seek out the tax relief, make maximum use of tax allowances, so greater incentive to evade the taxes. So, all these things which may lead to why the total tax revenue should have the fall if the tax rate has to be increased. So this is what which
avoid
he
paying
explains about.
taxation. There's also an incentive to evade taxation. Whilst tax avoidance is legal, tax evasion is illegal. And the classic example of this is when people earn an income, for example from a job, but don't declare it to the tax authorities, non-declaration of income and wealth. A third key reason is often linked to the labour market, that if we increase the tax rate, then there could be some disincentive effects for people either to take a job or to earn some extra income. And that might apply particularly to people at the top end of the labour market. But it can also be a factor when we think of the poverty trap for people at the bottom end, the lower end of the earnings scale. And a fourth possible explanation is that there could be, in the medium to long term, some brain drain effects. If a country introduces a particularly high relative tax rate compared to countries close by, for example, there might be some sort of depopulation impact as highly skilled, higher income taxpayers decide to move offshore or move to other countries in search of lower tax. The scale of this brain drain effect is often exaggerated by economists who actually favour lower taxes. It's important to be able to evaluate the laffer curve concept. The laffer curve idea is plausible, it's intuitive, but it often doesn't have much in the way of systematic econometric evidence behind it. So here are some evaluation points. Supporters of the laffer curve are often those who actually fundamentally in relative poverty or income inequality. On their income actually has little bearing on their work incentives, and in particular, indeed, for some people, if you cut taxes.
So here we are looking into the evaluation of Laffer curve. So some of them, they are those who are pushing for the lower rates and an higher income earnings. So many people are on fixed hours. So this is the tax rates have a little bearing on working incentives. So when we look into the effects of Laffer curve, he explains about it into two different effects, that is economic effect he calls it as, so which he calls it as in a longer run, and it is having an arithmetic effect what he calls it as an immediate effect. So every dollar in a tax cut is translates directly to the one less dollar in the government revenue. So every dollar in a tax cuts translates directly to one less dollar in the government. So whenever we are been thinking about the immediate effect, what he calls it as an arithmetic effect, it always brings the definitely when you reduce your tax rate, sudden fall in your tax rate, definitely there is a loss at the beginning stage we may feel, but later on it is being stated when it is been converted as an economic effect in a long run, definitely this income what has been reduced in the hands of the government as a for part of a revenue is being shared as an income to the consumers, which in turn which will boost an economy through the various effects. What we can also call it as Keynes says, it becomes an incentive effect and it moves on to an economy to accelerate the economy. So this is what we can say. We talked about the Laffer curve and its effect. Hope I made you to understand the concept better through this various PPT, and of course with the Word document and then other YouTube video. So thank you all. Thank you for watching this. Thank you.